Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we're speaking with Leslie Fenton in conjunction with her Cerulean Collective Exhibition, which is on view now through January 12th, 2025. Hello, Leslie.
Hi, Michael.
Thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah, thanks for making this happen.
Sure. So tell us a bit about yourself and the show.
Okay, well, let's see. I mean, I've been making art all my life, as is probably the story of many artists. I took classes at Fleischer when I was a teenager. I went to PCA when it was named that for evening classes. I've always drawn, and I eventually went to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts for 4 years and got a certificate there as a painter. Um, I showed my work at various galleries until I landed very fortunately at the Rosenfeld Gallery where I showed for many years. They closed, and then I was very fortuitously uh, able to land here at Cerulean. So uh, the type of work that I've been doing for many years now is um, what you're seeing in front of you, not in that form. The early stages were sort of a transition from painting with acrylic on canvas to beginning to incorporate paper directly on the canvas. And then eventually that evolved into um, working purely, just abandoning the canvas and working exclusively with paper. Um, Paper started to reveal itself to me as best medium for expressing something I have been interested in, which is almost like a shallow relief of uh, almost like shallow sculpture. So I start with cotton linter and I do many things with the paper using a very limited palette. Uh, and here we're looking at some um, pieces that I completed actually for another show, but decided to include in this one because they seemed thematically or in terms of image to relate to the pieces in the current show, my current
So,
work.
Leslie, may I ask you what cotton linter is?
Sure. An artist friend of mine um, suggested that I try using this, or I guess she was using it, and I was curious. It's a very thick, absorbent paper that comes in sheets. Paper makers use it and beat it into a pulp to make paper. I don't use it that way. I use it as sort of matter for creating, um, the building blocks or the pieces of matter that I use to construct these pieces, all in paper. Um, so the cotton linter, which starts out just as sheets of white paper, becomes very, very transformed in the process of making the pieces. Um, I'm interested, and you can see here, in um, maximizing what I can get from the paper expressively because I'm working with such a limited palette. I feel like that's where the kind of the action happens is what can you do with this paper? And I stipple it, I peel it, I scrape it away until it's sometimes like parchment thin in places. It allows for um, the pigments to kind of infuse the paper in very organic ways um, that can represent all kinds of forms that attract me or I find compelling uh, in the world, in the natural world. Um,
So your imagery seems like nature based.
it is, and yet I'm more interested. I mean, nature is endlessly interesting, not just to me, to many artists. What I feel like where there's room to really explore that's exciting to me is um, how to isolate certain motifs, I call them patterns, um, uh, types of types of form that I see in nature, and then trying to create like something that sort of mimics those forms or represents them, and then put them together in a piece that uh, no longer represents the actual place, but it's almost enters the visionary. I love the idea of inventing invention in the work, and giving it a kind of just a compelling imagery, feeling that I'm trying to coin something, a new way of working, and that the way of working is very much part of the image. Um, so, like this piece we're looking at, I called Quartet. Another part of what I'm interested in is putting together. I mean, there were sort of four different size panels that I created out of this paper, and I sort of love the idea of these almost like embryonic or ocean tossed forms that um, have movement, but then have become very solid by virtue of almost fossilized in the paper. So you get that tension between something that's sort of growing and free, but also embedded and fossilized and made sort of permanent, given a real physical presence. Um, so I'm always going between like pictorial illusion and the actual physical presence um, of the materials and the image. So I go between these smaller pieces and these larger ones, and they're both, they're equally interesting. The challenge of the small is to make them feel monumental, even though they're small, and then the large ones allow for a real, almost more epic exploration of, uh, certain kind of subject matter, um, and it's very, very time consuming. I score the paper, um, and peel it back and overprint it and carve away. Again, it what is possible with paper is really quite fascinating, and um, this piece exemplifies some of that. We go to Maine every summer, and so the forms that I'm representing in many of these pieces are, like crustacean, um, rock, rock striation, um, fossilized form, cross sections of trees, intertwining branches. Um, but, having them feel both very alive but very solidly there is just a very uh, compelling and exciting process for me. Um, so again, this piece I called Fire in the Narrows. The Narrows is the place in Maine where we stay. The Narrows is the water that runs between the island, Mount Desert Island, and the mainland, and so it's a tidal area. So you get a lot of interesting things happen at low tide. A lot is revealed. A lot of these kind of, I don't know, like tendrily and um, shell-like and rocky, um, eroded forms. And so I wanted the whole piece to feel very constructed. And so again, it's a challenge to do that and yet have some parts feel that they're sort of in the smoky distance.
So Leslie, are you design these in advance? I mean, do you have an idea for the imagery that you work
Well,
out
good
quickly?
question. I always feel like I wish I could. I have off, not always. I've come to understand my process a little more, but I always used to feel that I wish I could do that more and sort of work toward that. But what ends up really happening is I start out with what I sometimes think of as a matrix, the stuff that the image grows out of. I'll create pieces of paper that have somewhat similar values, put them together, and then they become, as I say, the matrix. And in the process of applying different kinds of paper, the piece just changes. It's the beauty of working this way. I move things around before I commit to adhering them. So they undergo many, many changes, and um, I'll carve pieces out sometimes and realign them or replace them until I have something that feels strong to me as an image or compelling to me as an image. Um, so it's a long it's a long back and forth to answer your question. I don't know if I did answer, but uh,
Yeah, well, it
it
sounds
starts
like
with
it's
a
a
hunch of
little bit
some
of both.
kind.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sounds like it's a little bit of both.
It is
It's
definitely, and
yeah,
and the balance is different for each piece.
right.
Um, this piece I called broadcast. I was interested in these, uh, like the sense of something below the surface, and then something at the picture, like at a mid level, and then on top. So you're not just moving side to side and up and down. You're sort of moving through the image as well. And I was thinking of these rings in this piece as kind of sound. We had a bird's nest like it was in the wall right outside my studio, and it went on all summer. And I began to start thinking of the sound of the birds as, you know, what this piece ended up kind of being about, which is why I called it broadcast. It was like these birds were sort of broadcasting this sound, and it was endless. Um,
So are there artists that you think about or inspire you?
Yeah, I guess I don't think of working in I love this idea of invention, and I've been trying to commit to this way of working and what can I get out of it. So, but I do love, I have looked at many other artists, and I think what I get from them are like different qualities from different artists who I admire. I think about, say, for example, the physicality of Anselm Kiefer's paintings. But then I think about the concern for, like the kind of light and stillness in say Vermeer. I hold that in mind, and I realize these do not look like Vermeer, but it's that idea of a quality of light and stillness, and the concern for every sort of square inch of the piece, all over. And uh, so again, we're looking here at this piece I called Watchfire. And this was a little bit out of the usual. I was um, reading the Iliad at one point, and what always stuck with me was this imagery of the watchfires, in one passage, at night, the Trojans, and the sense of like just hundreds of them. And but it turned into this kind of, I wanted to have this central image. It turned into something a little more mythic, I guess, with that sort of giant, feels like a flame, like sort of the mythic, origin flame. in the center, but going up to the sky and smoke.
And your palette is very particular in terms of the blues and the reds and the grays and the
Yeah,
browns.
I was saying a little bit before, but this is very true. I feel like it's plenty to work with ultramarine blue and the umbers, if you have raw umber for cool, burnt umber for warm, and then just white. It's possible to get all of these different um, sort of values, and it's all about relationships. It's like I didn't. I felt I don't need red. I don't need green. I think these are also they feel very elemental to me, and because of pieces being more about sort of rock and um, water and air and
I mean,
um,
there's a lot of color. It's just a narrow
right.
um,
Another thing I would
light.
say is, especially in this piece, is I, the idea of density. Really, I've been thinking a lot about. I mean, even the air. I sit outside and look at the air, and before you know it, you're sort of really seeing the air is full of all kinds of matter, the very air itself. Um, so it's sort of like you may have a garden, or you may have you know all of these sort of natural forms growing, but you also have them growing within this incredible density of insect life and just pollen and just particulates and matter and all sorts of things. Uh, and that's a lot of what this piece was trying to sort of make manifest, that sense of just a very like the full density of what's all around us. So I called that biotapestry. And this piece felt to me as it developed, it had these oceanic forms, and the sense to me was that they were being revealed, that something was being pulled back and they were being revealed. And I was thinking about, um, like before a tsunami, um, how the ocean draws back. And of course, this is sort of an imagined, um, sort of, visionary um, representation of what maybe that looks like. And so in the air, up in the atmosphere, and there's sort of these looming, cloud forms, but also these, uh, it's, these swirls almost just represent a kind of energy. Um, and in the upper right, there was sort of a very um, kind of drifting moon. And, but again, um, I ended up calling this sea drawback with that in mind of the ocean sort of just being sucked back and revealed before this tsunami happens. Um,
So when you're at work, I mean, do you have an array of colored paper shapes like all ready to go, or are you generating them as you?
I do both. To get going, I'll sometimes just start with larger swaths of paper and piece. Sometimes, they're pretty large, I would say. Like for the smaller pieces, I don't know why I tend to work in like fours. So I might have like four panels. So if you look hard, or maybe more than four, but you can see the seams. You can see sort of the rectangular forms underneath. but then it's sort of a there's sort of that disjuncture, but then and you still feel that with the end at the end of the piece with the completed piece, but there's also an attempt to try and integrate these forms and bring them get get them interacting and um, you know feeling like there's a tension there, I think, between um, finding a balance and a harmony, but there's still a certain amount of disjuncture. Um,
And are
and
you
then
working
again,
on multiple pieces at the same time or one at a time or
yeah. So once I kind of decide, like I decided I wanted to do this square. I called it sampling square. I decided I wanted to have the inside feel like it had trapped some of these insects that were sort of, I mean, I don't mean to put too fine a literal point on it, but that's sort of what I had in mind in a kind of abstract way. So then I had to make, paper for the center part and then different kinds of paper for the out. Sometimes I'll make a larger piece and then kind of cut it up. I did that in this case, cut it up and made smaller ones and then kind of butt them up and glue them down together to, it to create. Well, that's sort of what this was all about, just putting these, um, sort of what happens. I mean, as we know as artists, it's just so interesting to see what happens when you put essentially when you put one thing next to another.
yeah, right. Well, that's what it's all about
It's what it's all
ultimately.
about, and it's exciting. And yeah, so I do start with it's different in different cases, but I don't start with just one piece of paper that I lay down. It's usually several large pieces, and then I don't commit to it right early on. Though I lay them down, it's inspiring, or um, it inspires something, and then I go from there. Then I make pieces. Then I make some paper that will help advance the image somehow, and then I uh, treat them in different ways. The image develops. I give it sort of a working title because, uh, but it's always about not being afraid to go out in left field and try something, and then um, try to make it work. It's sort of that process of you're working intuitively, but then sort of want to understand it too at the same time. So, but usually the intuition has to rule because it's not a logical process, is it?
Well, I mean the process is so physical and concrete that I imagine the piece starts to tell you what it wants to be in
Uh-huh.
respect. Like, you either follow it or you try to bend it to your idea.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but it seems, you know, to make more sense to follow what the paper's telling
Well,
you.
well, absolutely, because it's that's exactly right. Because I could have an idea. This is what I want to say, but I have to speak in my medium. If I'm not
Yeah.
speaking in the paper and just making it adhere to some title that I came up with, that's really short-circuiting the process of dealing with the material, right?
Yeah.
So,
It becomes a material language.
right, for sure. Yes. And this piece we're looking at now was sort of ended up aligning with a memory of a place we've been in Maine at night. And again, there's sort of visionary, I want to say. I don't mean in the sense of seeing spirits or anything, but there's a certain uh, yeah, I'm thinking of um, many. artists right now, but a visionary quality that maybe borders on realism sometimes, but they're all abstract in conception, I would say. Um,
And you're going to teach a workshop it, with,
yes, I'm
yes,
looking forward to that.
in March.
Uh-huh.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like how,
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that people would like to come, and I would be happy to share some of my thought process and approaching my work, and then maybe a couple of short demos on some ways that I prepare the paper and turn it into this matter. Um, I'd be interested in maybe how people might think they could use it to create uh, works that align with what they're interested in and their own personal visions. So I think it could be really an interesting process, collaboration and learning for everyone.
definitely. And people can find out about the workshop on the website, ceruleanarts.com. Just go to the studio page. And it's a beautiful show, Leslie.
Michael, thank you.
And the show is up through January 12th. We hope people come check it out. And you can also see everything is available on the website as well, ceruleanarts.com. And thanks again for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for arranging it all.
Sure thing. Take care and have a good night.
You have a great night.